I haven't played this bumper music before. It's called Beverly Hills. What do you think about this here? I don't know. Yeah, I can see where that is kind of the case, you know. I can see where that's kind of the case, kind of 80s, you know, which, all right, I'm a child of the 80s. I got to get out of that. Let's talk about contemporary. Let's talk about Dez Bryant. And I mentioned before that, you know, some of the questions that are being asked, you know, what would you do if a coach punches you in the face? For NFL prospects in here, you know, years ago, Dez Bryant being asked, is your mother a prostitute? Speaking of hitting people in the face, anyway, but Dez, and I mentioned this before, told a radio station down in Dallas, of course he was cut by the Cowboys, that he wouldn't want to play for the Patriots, but he would want to play for the Giants. Sounds absurd, right? It sounds absolutely absurd. Then I started scratching my chin a little bit, and I said, now wait just a minute. I know that Eli Manning isn't getting any younger, and neither is Dez Bryant, but the one question about Dez Bryant is, could he get separation like he used to be able to get from, you know, defensive backs? And the idea was that he wasn't. Oh, he could still go up and get the ball as well as anybody, but beating that DB by a step, that was a problem. Now, you know, Odell Beckham Jr., that's still not a problem. I mean, you know, give him one hand, he'll catch the ball, right? I want to ask you a question, though. Giants, I know they've done nothing except that 11-5, you know, playoff appearance, short-lived 2 years ago. Other than that, since their last Super Bowl in 2010, it's been nothing but losing seasons, right? Okay, 3-13 last year. Nothing special about that, right? Okay. Eli's old and never really was. You know, throws too many people. Let me ask you this. How would you like to go to war next year? Just theorizing here. Eli Manning throwing Dez Bryant and Odell Beckham Jr. and Saquon Barkley getting the ball. Think about that offense for a second. Suddenly the Eagles are a little nervous now, aren't they? Say nothing of the Cowboys and the Skins. I know. Pierre-Paul is now a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. You know, what are they going to do on defense? I get that, sure. That would be one hell of an offense. That's not a 3-13 team anymore. So that's the curious thing, is how the Giants will go in trying to rebuild. And I'll tell you about that here. In fact, the reports are that the Giants, and a lot of people here, that they've got the second pick in the draft, and they're really, right now, though, liking Sam Darnold. And again, the Bryant and Beckham wide receiver, that's hypothetical, obviously. That's Dez Bryant saying, yeah, I'd like that. Maybe he's even trying to get under the Cowboys' skin, saying that he'd rather go to a division mate that went 3-13 than play for Dallas after they didn't pay him. I mean, that's a possibility, too. Don't get me wrong. Somebody else said, I heard this, how'd you like to have the divas of Beckham and Bryant on the same team? How are you going to handle that, Coach Shermer? But at the same time, it would give them, I mean, a top-of-the-line offense in 2018, would it not? Anyway, Sam Darnold is supposedly the player that the Giants, though, are looking at. And yeah, I can see that. Eventual replacement, maybe a replacement sooner than later for Eli Manning. Remember, Manning wasn't supposed to play his rookie year. It was going to be Kurt Warner for the Giants. And by the end of the year, Eli Manning was playing. So, you know, what is that going to be? But that could be, well, how are we going to take this? What if the Browns take Darnold? Right now, it looks like Darnold is the guy that most people think is going to be taken with the top pick in the draft. Browns need a quarterback. I mean, I am not necessarily sold that Deshaun Kaiser can't play well. I know he played and started on an 0-16 team last year, but showed me enough against the Steelers in the season finale that I said, there are things like growing pains for a quarterback. So, I mean, it would seem like, he's destined to be a backup, but was a second-round pick. I do think it might be premature, but are you going to want to bet the farm on Kaiser when you have, the potential for bringing in a Sam Darnold? Of course you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. So that's the case there. But it looks like that Darnold, even Jim Mora, who, of course, was Josh Rosen's quarterback coach at UCLA, is saying that Darnold would be a better fit for the NFL. The question is, are the Browns going to take him? And you know what? That might actually influence just the direction whether or not the Giants go for rebuilding this year. The now popular term is tanking, but whether they go for rebuilding this year, or they actually would try to make one final run with Eli Manning, who wants to get a third Super Bowl ring to best his brother. That. 37, okay, we get that, but, still. By the way, this all, one of the things came about, and the idea of Dez Bryant playing with the Giants. Why? Because he said he didn't want to play for the Patriots. Why? Because the Patriots, there's a soap opera going on. Josh Harrison, listen to me. I think I'm talking about the Pirates' third baseman. James Harrison, former Steeler linebacker, didn't play much for him last year, but when he did play, he was successful. And after he was released, went to the New England Patriots and excelled. It's a major force in their pass rush going all the way to the Super Bowl. But he retired earlier this week, 40 years old. Nobody really wanted him. There's some talk about him maybe even being a mixed martial arts fighter because for a 40-year-old, he's in such good shape. But, and so you get, it is becoming the greasing the skids. Certainly the Steelers greased the skids for James Harrison. Heck, they tried to get rid of him 5 years ago, but he, went to the Bengals and was so good that they said, well, maybe we want you back. Got some talk about the Bengals here in just a second. Quite a few personnel shakeups with the Patriots. Of course, the possession receiver Danny Amendola no longer there. Colin Cowherd, by the way, the beginning of the month had a very interesting take, and I think it's worth revisiting what with the story that Brady, he isn't 100% and coming back next year. 5 key offensive players have been allowed to walk out the door, says Colin Cowherd. Danny Amendola, Nate Soldier, Cameron Fleming, Dean Lewis, former running back, and Brandon Cooks was traded away. Now James Harrison, oldie but a goodie, retires rather than comes back to Foxborough. So that means Tom Brady goes into the year with his 2 best offensive pieces being a 32-year-old Julian Edelman off ACL surgery and the not physically reliable Rob Gronkowski. One of them gets hurt. Brady will have to pull the entire team. He'll have to, pick up the slack. He's being depleted of weapons. What will the Patriots surround him? Here's a philosophy. Here's a thought. What if the Patriots go defense in the first round? Would that influence Tom Brady's decision to come back or not? Interesting thought in all this. Like I said, I know the idea. Brady's numbers are going down. He just set the Super Bowl record for passing yards, for crying out loud. I think that it's a little too early to predict the demise of Tom Brady, even at 40. I want to see worse. I want to see something other than one long bomb away from taking the Super Bowl into overtime and putting 33 points up on the board in the Super Bowl against a pretty good Eagles defense before I say that Tom Brady can't do it anymore. I do want to say, mentioning the Bengals there a little bit earlier, and I mentioned, that teams asking the Ohio State linebacker, Joe Thomas, what would you do if if a coach hit you in the face, which now ETSU players may need to be asked. But anyway, Bengals owner Mike Brown was asking when Eric Reid visited the Bengals a little while ago questions about kneeling for the anthem along with Colin Kaepernick. Took the Paul Harvey dramatic pause right there. And the Bengals were absolutely raked over the coals for this. Why? Because Reid, they seem to be more concerned about Eric Reid's protest than domestic violence. At least that's what Frank Schwab of Shutdown Corner is writing. Now, Schwab is a big Kaepernick fan, etc., etc. But let's see here. And when Reid came to visit the Bengals, Brown said that he would prohibit Reid from kneeling for the national anthem. And then a report from Pro Football Talk said Brown had a conversation with Reid during his free agent visit, and it was almost exclusively about his protests. Now, the thing is, this has become such horrible public relations for the NFL. I don't blame them for asking that question. Forget freedom of speech. If I hire somebody, maybe I don't want them exhibiting behavior that will divide my staff. And in this case, my fan base. So legitimate question, Reid ranked as the 30th best safety. He's not a Pro Bowler anymore, hasn't been in 5 years. So again, what kind of a clubhouse lawyer are you going to be, if one at all, Mr. Reid? Now, the Bengals are getting under a lot of scrutiny because, of course, you know that they've been hiring bad boys. Joe Mixon, Pac-Man Jones. It seems the writers are saying that, it's okay for domestic violence, but it's not okay to kneel for the anthem. Is this really an either-or? That's the question that I want to ask. I mean, to me, it's sort of like back when ETSU had dropped football, and a year later, they started a pharmacy school. Oh, it's so much more important to have a pharmacy school for a university than a football team. Why are you playing them off against each other? How is that productive? I mean, if you want to go that route, my goodness. Why, it's more important to have a pharmacy school than a drama department, an art department. I don't know. Let's talk about the morality of medicine versus finance. Do we really want to go down that road? Why, it's more important to have a pharmacy school than a literary department. Is it? I mean, where do we begin? Where do we stop? And I think that that's a similar either or. Oh, you want to know if they'll protest for the anthem, but you don't care about these players, these bad boys that you've signed. Frankly, yeah, I think that it's a legitimate question. And you don't, team chemistry, not wanting to have clubhouse lawyers, is exactly what has, is something legitimately, a legitimate concern. Next thing I would point out, for all the teammates, even Dan Kilgore has been on this show, that have defended Colin Kaepernick's right to kneel for the anthem, and so on. Look at what that clubhouse lawyering did to the 49ers. It made them drop from the second best team in the league to 2-14 in a very short period of time, and all while Kaepernick was in the prime of his career. Think about that. The Cincinnati Bengals are out to win football games. I know, sometimes it's hard to believe that, but they had that big spoiler victory against Baltimore last year, remember? They're not out there to, engage in political protest. They're out there to win football games. I think it's very disappointing, to be honest with you, that the Bengals have seemed to not care so much about a player's checkered past. I think it's really bad. I think the Steelers are the same way, as a matter of fact. But nevertheless, that's kind of a legitimate concern, especially when you see how Kaepernick and Reid's kneeling sunk the San Francisco 49ers. Bengals made the playoffs in many straight years, but were 7-9 last year. They'd probably rather be a playoff team again, and it's a legitimate question for a player who may have helped create the 49ers' demise. By the way, also getting criticism, and also, this is an old story right here, but I just want to mention this. Houston Texans owner Bob McNair, of course, a couple of weeks ago, he came under fire last year when he made comments about inmates running the prison. And somehow that was, and I never understood why that was an objectionable comment. But I think McNair put it rather well. Our playing field is not the place for political statements and not the place for religious statements. By the way, the same people who are saying, well, you should allow Kaepernick to kneel or making him out to be a hero are usually the ones who would criticize, football players for in an interview saying something along the lines of, well, first I want to thank God for allowing me to score the touchdown and all that. They're the first ones that criticize that. Well, McNair is now, he's playing it down the middle, right? Political protests, and also, I don't know who you offend with, I'd like to thank God, atheists maybe, I don't know, but, it's the place for football. Fans are our customers. You can replace the owners, and the league will survive. You can replace the players, although the game won't be good, but you can't replace the fans. McNair has actually been criticized for that statement. Why? I do not understand that one bit. And there's trying times in the NFL, but yeah, you've got to get away from, you really do. I do believe that there has been a sectioning of so many sports. I'll try to make this statement as non-political as I can. NASCAR is the country boy sport. The NBA, that's the urban sport. Tennis, golf, hockey. Those sports are very suburban. Baseball used to be everyman, but it's now becoming more and more pointy-headed. That leaves football as the last everyman sport. And they obviously don't want to lose the everyman by having controversial imagery which puts them out of line with something as wholesome as the American flag. I'm Marky Bilson, Tri-City Sports Now. Our final segment, a little maybe about the draft, a little bit more, when we return after this. From unwanted, unused